There was a time not all that long ago when the entertainment world was firmly gripped by 3 words: Game of Thrones. A fantasy television series based on novels from the mid-90s with an ensemble cast. Sounds like a hard sell to the casual viewer, yet despite all the odds, the show caught on like wildfire. As the seasons ticked on by, we became invested more and more into these characters, these families, and these mysteries we so desperately wanted the answers to. Friends and families gathered together for watch parties at the drop of every episode, eager to see what would happen to their favourites. The cast and crew cut through the award ceremonies and picked up accolades by the score. Game of Thrones was mainstream, and it dominated the headlines. It dominated the conversations in work or school or wherever you found yourself during those years. It was honestly so hard to avoid the discussion, as no matter where you turned, there was somebody talking about the Red Wedding or Jon Snow's parents or what's happening beyond the wall or who will ultimately end up sitting on the Iron Throne. Then, something happened. As the show edged past its halfway mark, it ran out of books to adapt. You see, the author of the A Song of Ice and Fire series, George R.R. Martin, has been writing these stories for nearly 30 years at this point, and it has become ever expanding with each new entry adding dozens of locations, characters, plot lines, and intrigue. Yet, the expansion of the world also meant a grinding development cycle between books, with the last main series entry coming 2011. Meanwhile, nearly the entire TV series came and went, all 8 seasons, in the space it has taken Martin to finish the next book, Winds of Winter. This left the showrunners David Benioff and Dan Wise without a road to follow, which meant they had to carve their own path to the finish line. I mean, how hard could it be to finish the magnum opus of a once-in-a-lifetime storyteller and stick the landing in a way that satisfies the fans, the network, Martin, and, well, themselves? The truth is, they couldn't. With each new season that strayed further and further from the source material, it became clearer and clearer that the books had been a major crutch in keeping the showrunners successful for as long as they were. To give the devil their due, Benioff and Wise managed to add elements into the show that weren't present in the books that really ended up landing. Certain scenes and plotlines were all their making and ended up being a real joy to watch. Yet, when the steering wheel was firmly placed in their hands, it didn't take all that long for them to crash Titanic straight into the iceberg. The final 2 seasons of the show were largely panned by fans all around the world. The last season especially left such a sour taste in the mouth of anybody that had stuck by the show all the way to the bitter end. Character assassination, dropped plot lines, nonsensical writing, plot holes by the dozen, teleporting characters, little explanation for anything that was going on, and a damn Starbucks coffee cup left in shot. This aired on national television. The show that once was the gold standard of television in writing, cast, crew, production was now the punching bag of the world, and it's hard to say they didn't deserve it. David Benioff and Dan Wise thought they were leaving for greener pastures and blew up the Hindenburg trying to get there. The result? Well, Game of Thrones left behind a frustrated cast, a disappointed creator, and an army of furious fans the world over. The ending was such a colossal failure and soured the Game of Thrones name so badly that it all but removed itself from the cultural zeitgeist almost overnight. Damage that the IP is only really starting to recover from now with the success of the spin-off series House of the Dragon, and the rumours of a Winds of Winter release date dropping soon. We will get back to that one. So that probably leaves you with the question, well, what is this video for? Well, dear viewers, we put together this video for those people that fell so in love with the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, yet were so brutally let down by the ending of the TV show. It's time to put down the television remote because we are going to take a look at the Song of Ice and Fire novels and the incredible world that George R.R. Martin managed to craft inside of them. We are going to explore what makes these books so special and why it warranted a hugely successful adaptation to begin with, as well as looking at the future of these books, and well, if it even has one. From this point on, we will be touching on spoilers for the story, so just be warned. Let's jump right in. The world of A Song of Ice and Fire isn't like ours. yet is heavily inspired by the medieval era stories from Europe such as The War of the Roses. Martin always wore his influences proudly, and they range from as far as our own history to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror and Cthulhu mythos, to even Stan Lee and Marvel Comics. Despite the majority of his early writing being in the science fiction or horror genres, Martin had always pined to pen his fantasy epic. After growing frustrated and disillusioned writing in the world of television and film, Martin returned to his first love of novels in the early 90s and finally began breathing life into what would become A Song of Ice and Fire. Westeros is a world of class divides between the common folk and the noble houses, of which there are dozens upon dozens, nearly all vying for power and personal gain amidst a backdrop of devious politics that corrupts the land and blood pacts that run centuries deep. This is Westeros, and is subdivided into 7 different kingdoms, all ruled by one king, Robert Baratheon. One of the first things you may notice after picking up these books is just how alive and lived in this world feels. You aren't stepping into squeaky clean new land for your viewing, nor is it present that way to the reader. You are taking a look at this world through the characters' eyes, and it isn't pretty. Westeros is rough and dirty, violent and cruel, and even these great noble houses are built atop the corpses of those that rule before them, best explained by the king's own throne, the Iron Throne. The seat coveted by anybody who is anyone in the Westeros political hierarchy, and yet it isn't some ornate piece of golden furniture, it is an ugly chair as tall as a small home, built from melted swords of those who surrendered to Aegon Targaryen nearly 300 years before the main story begins. It is said that Aegon took the swords of those houses that bent the knee to him and used the fire from his dragon, Balerion, the Black Dread, to warp them and beat them into the shape of a throne worthy of a conqueror. Though the dragons are long since dead and extinct, the throne remains to this day. This is just an example of the history of Westeros, being present everywhere you look in the story. Every location has a story and every character has tales to tell. This fictional world feels alive like few others I've ever experienced. The history of the world is such a key figure in everything we see unfold. Our story that we follow doesn't take place during some great conflict, at least not initially. It actually takes place 16 years after Robert's Rebellion, a war in which the current king Robert Baratheon, along with his best friend Eddard Ned Stark, and their rebel army managed to topple the Targaryen dynasty that had ruled for centuries. As we follow various characters all these years later, we can still see how that war is affecting them mentally and how it has shaped the current world around us. One of the most important characters in the first book, and really the whole series, is Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince of the Mad King Aerys Targaryen, and the would-be heir to the Iron Throne. Yet Rhaegar never actually appears in the flesh. Why? Because he was killed 16 years ago by Robert Baratheon, a warhammer beaten through his chest during the Battle of the Trident, the decisive conflict in Robert's Rebellion. 2 men that went to war for the love and affection of one Lyanna Stark, Ned's younger sister, and another important figure that died years before the main story takes place. So, why are we even talking about them, I hear you ask? Well, because the spectre of Rhaegar and Lyanna are a constant hanging over the narrative as we see it play out. They are constantly being brought up by Robert and Ned, Tyrion and Tywin Lannister, and Rhaegar's younger sister Daenerys, despite never meeting him. The story is informed by what came before. There was a world that existed before we started viewing it, and it is every bit as detailed and nuanced and layered as the portion of history that we get to see unfold in the main series books. I can't state enough what a service this does to the reading experience and the process of immersing yourself in the story. Beyond the history of the region, the world of Ice and Fire isn't the stereotypical fantasy setting of good and evil, chivalrous knight out to save the day. Some of the Westerosi knights are the worst, most corrupt people in the story, yet it is the societal setup of the world that bends some of the characters this way. Let me explain. The world this story takes place in is one where people are bound by oaths, and honor is a term held in such regard, even to such an extreme point it becomes obsessive, immoral, and just plain wrong. Jaime Lannister is a key figure throughout the main story, yet 16 years prior, during Robert's Rebellion, he was a sworn knight of the King's Guard, the youngest ever, in fact, an elite group of knights that were clad in all white and sworn to defend their king no matter what. The climax of the rebellion came when Jaime's father, Tywin, led his forces to the gates of King's Landing, pleading with the Mad King Aerys to be allowed entry into the city to aid him before the rebels arrived. Aerys' small council nearly all advised not to let the Lannister army into the gates. Even Jaime advised against it, knowing his dastardly father would never join the losing side of a war. Aerys disregarded them and opened the gates. Much to his horror, the Lannisters killed everyone in sight en route to Aerys, who was holed up in the Red Keep along with Jaime, one of the last of the King's Guard. It was unknown exactly what happened, as Jaime rarely spoke of it, but once Ned Stark arrived at the keep, he walked into the throne room to find Aerys dead and Jaime Lannister sitting on the Iron Throne with a bloodied sword sat across his lap. Ned was disgusted, as was the rest of Westeros. Yes, Jaime killed who was ultimately the big bad of Robert's Rebellion, yet he broke his oaths as a member of the Kingsguard to do it. In the words of Barristan Selmy, he profaned his blade with the blood of the king he swore to protect. Jaime is vilified for executing Aerys, and is jeeringly dubbed Kingslayer by his contemporaries, including Ned Stark, a man he had looked up to and respected. This broke something in the young Lannister boy. What we don't find out until much later is why Jaime did what he did. While the Lannister army swept through the streets of King's Landing, murdering and pillaging, Aerys sat on his throne, a defeated man, with nobody but Jaime and his messenger Rossart. Aerys commands Rossart to deliver a message to his pyromancers to ignite the stashes of wildfire placed throughout King's Landing. Wildfire is a liquid that produces massive explosions of green fire when ignited. Jaime panicked. In the heat of the moment, he chased down Rossart and killed him before he could share his message, and then killed Aerys too. The Mad King was about to blow up the city, an entire capital filled with innocent people. Jaime was 17 years old and had just broken his oath in the name of justice and honour. He did what he thought was just. He did what was just. And what did he get in return? The brand of Kingslayer, branded onto his reputation forevermore, sullied in the eyes of the world for doing the right thing. Looked down upon by his peers and those around him. Again, that broke something in Jaime. It turned him cold. He retreated back into what he knew. Maybe the only true love he ever knew. His sister, Cersei. So many vows. They make you swear and swear. Defend the king. Obey the king. Keep his secrets. Do his bidding. Your life for his. But obey your father. Love your sister. Protect the innocent. Defend the weak. Respect the gods. Obey the laws. It's too much. No matter what you do, you're forsaking one vow for the other. The whole point of that story being that this world isn't fair, it isn't just, and despite how often the term is mentioned, it is far from honourable. Jaime Lannister committed what could be the most honourable and noble act any knight does in the series, and he is vilified and hated for it. This is but one picture, one example of the cruelty and brutal irony that comes with the world this story takes place in. Nobody is born evil. They are made evil by the world they live in. They are made who they are by the people around them. In my humble opinion, the greatest aspect of A Song of Ice and Fire has always been the characters. I've always found it a rarity that a book, or any kind of story for that matter, has more than a few truly great characters. When I say great, I don't just mean fun, witty dialogue or powerful scenes. I mean all of that in a sense that they are more than just a one-note silhouette of a character. The characters in this story have real emotion, real thoughts and feelings about the world and the people around them. They have agency even in the scenes that don't feature them. We hear tales and rumours of what the rest of the cast are up to. A Song of Ice and Fire is told through POV chapters. Any said book can follow up to a half a dozen of these POVs, giving us insight and perspective on every major focal point in the greater story at play. Let's take the first book, A Game of Thrones. It follows 9 POVs, that being of Ned Stark, his wife Catelyn, his children Arya, Sansa, Bran and Jon. Them being the major power in the north of Westeros and the closest thing these books have to good guys. If the first book had a main character, it would be Ned Stark. The story opens with him being visited by his old friend King Robert and requesting that Ned travel south to King's Landing and act as a new Hand of the King, a position of great prestige, basically acting as the king in his stead and aiding in the running of the Seven Kingdoms. This all comes in the wake of the former Hand's death, Jon Arryn, a man who acted as a father figure to both Robert and Ned in their youth when they were both fostered in the Eyrie. Ned wants to turn down Robert's offer and remain in through his sister, but a twist of events ends up with Ned and Catelyn finding out through her sister and Jon Arryn's wife that the former Hand had actually been murdered. This gives Ned a reason to accept Robert's offer, as he can investigate the death for himself once he is down in King's Landing. I think this is genius on the part of Martin. The hook at the beginning of the book is that of a mystery story. It is the intrigue that grabs the reader and helps ease them slowly into this melting pot of politics and chaos. Game of Thrones starts off as more of a mystery story that happens to be in a fantasy setting than just straight-laced fantasy story, and I think the story benefits greatly from that. We also follow Tyrion Lannister, the Imp, son to Tywin, brother to Jaime and Cersei. Tyrion is the black sheep of House Lannister, the wealthy lords of the West, and one of the most powerful families in the Seven Kingdoms, by proxy of Cersei's marriage to King Robert. Tyrion is sarcastic and belligerent and kind, though can oft switch to a Tywin-like cruelty, seemingly on the drop of a dime. He gives us an opposing view to the Starks as we follow the story of the first book. His chapters are often the most fun to read, and were some of Martin's favourites to write. I think that really comes through in the writing. Tyrion goes on a great journey around the Seven Kingdoms throughout his chapters, starting in the Starks' home of Winterfell and travelling north to the Great Wall, then south where he is captured by Catelyn Stark and accused of conspiring to have her son Bran murdered in his bed. This kicks off a series of events and eventually snowball into the War of the Five Kings. I won't bring you through his whole story beat for beat. I want you to read it and experience that for yourselves. What starts as maybe the most understated POV that quickly grows in importance with each chapter is that of Jon Snow. Jon is the bastard child to Ned Stark. Super quick side note, I'm not covering R plus L equals J. That is best found out by yourself as the story unfolds. A bastard being a child had out of wedlock. In the Song of Ice and Fire universe, bastards are treated with disdain and ill content, often shunned by their fathers. Ned was said to have fathered Jon to a woman named Wylla, while he was away from home fighting in Robert's rebellion. It was certainly seen as a mark against the ever-honourable Ned Stark when he rode back to Winterfell and rode back to his wife Catelyn, holding another woman's baby boy in his arms. Fast forward to the start of our journey, and Jon is very much the black sheep of the Stark family, though he is treated with respect and love by Ned, Robb, Bran, and especially Arya. He is shunned by Sansa and Catelyn, especially the latter, serving as an ever-present reminder of her husband's infidelity. In Westeros, bastards cannot be named heir to any titles or lands. So despite being Ned's second oldest child, he is not in the line of succession and is completely cast aside. With nothing to really lose, Jon Snow decides to leave his family behind to join the Night's Watch, a brotherhood of volunteers that swear an oath to protect the Wall from whatever threats may come their way. The Wall is just that, a massive wall of ice that covers the length of northern Westeros and separates it from the Arctic lands of always winter to the far north. The Wall is a mysterious and imposing landmark, said to have been constructed centuries ago by a Stark named Brandon the Builder, in an effort to protect the realms of men from the dangers that lay to icy north. It is said the Wall once housed a proud army of black, yet by the time Jon joins the Watch, it is made up of little more than war criminals, beggars, murderers, and the dross of Westeros. Jon's story follows him really trying to find a place in the world that seemingly doesn't want him. He befriends some of the other boys of the Watch and acts as close aide to the Lord Commander Jeor Mormont. The Watch are caught between a growling conflict with the Wildlings, a wild people that live beyond the Wall in scattered tribes, as well as the growing threat of the Others. The Others are a mysterious and ancient force, humanoid creatures that are seemingly made from living ice. They have emerged from the far-flung north after disappearing thousands of years before. Losing a battle against the combined efforts of man, known as the Long Night, the Watch fears that their re-emergence is a sign that another long night is on the horizon. It couldn't come at a worse time, while the realms of man are stuck in a chaotic war for the Iron Throne. The final POV is Daenerys Targaryen, the daughter of the Mad King Aerys, and the younger sister of Prince Rhaegar, and along with her brother Viserys, the very last of the once great Targaryen dynasty. Daenerys' POV follows the young Targaryens as they are in exile in the neighbouring continent of Essos. A harsh land of deserts and raiders, slavers and pirates, the Targaryen fled here as children following the end of Robert's rebellion, fearing they would be killed by Robert to stop any future threat of a Targaryen uprising from occurring. That is exactly what Viserys plans to do. With the help of a wealthy cheese merchant named Illyrio Mopatas and a disgraced Westerosi knight by the name of Jorah Mormont, Viserys plans on building an army here in Essos capable of sailing back to reclaim the Targaryens' birthright of the Iron Throne. Viserys, however, is far from the man his older brother Rhaegar was. He is quick to temper, full of foolish pride, and naive in his ways. With the help of Illyrio, he brokers a deal with the Dothraki, a nomadic people that form hordes known as khalasars. They worship a horse god, and their mounts are of utmost respect and worship within their culture. A man that can't ride is no man at all in the eyes of the Dothraki. The largest and most dangerous of these khalasars is led by a savage warrior by the name of Khal Drogo. Viserys offers Drogo Daenerys' hand in marriage, in exchange for his horde's allegiance in the eventual invasion of Westeros. He trades his younger sister for an army. This doesn't go in Viserys' favour, and he quickly fears the Dothraki are undermining and disrespecting him at every turn. Daenerys, however, slowly learns to love her place at the side of the Khal as his new Khaleesi, or wife. It marks a shifting in power in her relationship with Viserys, who had always been abusive during her upbringing. Her POV is mostly disconnected from the others and shares little to no characters during the first half of the series. Daenerys' POV almost acts as that looming storm in the horizon that keeps growing and growing, slowly moving closer and closer to the Westeros storyline. That is but a few of the main characters' arcs throughout the first book. With that being said, some of the finest chapters and characters in these books come through the secondary characters. Close your eyes and listen to this. A young knight of minor noble house, handsome as any in the land and barring a purple lightning bolt on a black field for his sigil. He vows to Eddard Stark that he will kill Gregor Clegane, a crazed mountain of a man and named as such. The handsome young knight is killed, yet as the War of the Five Kings unfolds, we hear tell that he and his men are still fighting the just cause in the Riverlands, yet he is killed again and again, killed by Sir Burton Crakehall and Sir Imry Lorch and Sir Gregor Clegane. Yet he still rides, still fights, still holds up the vows he made to Ned Stark, even in death. This handsome knight, or perhaps was, Sir Beric Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord. By the second book, we only hear about Beric through rumour and telltales. His group has taken the name The Brotherhood Without Banners and have taken it upon themselves to help the small folk where they can, and fight the Lannister forces where they must. Beric isn't a main character, far from it. He doesn't have his own POV and scarcely features in others, yet his actions have big consequences in the story. The fact that a minor character like Beric has such agency in the greater story makes the world feel a level deeper than that of other fictional worlds. By the time we meet Beric in the flesh once more, in the third book, he is far from the handsome knight that Ned Stark had given the task to back in King's Landing. The rumours of his death were true, all of them. Dondarrion had been killed 6 times and brought back from the dead 7. But how? Well, the world of ice and fire contains magic, but not in a traditional sense, not like, say, Harry Potter where you hold a wand and say your spell aloud. The magic in Martin's world is dark and mysterious, oftentimes evil and cruel. It is a world filled with gods and prophecy, how many of which are real is a complete mystery. Beric travelled with the Red Priest of R'hllor, or the Lord of Light. Through prayer and devotion, Thoros has been able to bring Beric back from the dead each time he was slain, yet every time he comes back it seems he is less of Beric and more an empty husk. His body still carries the wounds of each death, a lost eye with only a raw red socket in its place, a caved-in skull, a deep scar across his throat where he was hanged, a deep slash across his body where he was struck down. He looks more scarecrow than man as the story progresses, yet worst of all is his memory that slips further and further away with every time he's revived. Can I dwell on what I scarce remember? I held a castle in the Marches once, and there was a woman I was pledged to marry, but I could not find that castle today, nor tell you the colour of that woman's hair. Who knighted me, old friend? What were my favourite foods? It all fades. Sometimes I think I was born in the bloody grass in that grove of ash, with the taste of fire in my mouth and a hole in my chest. The magic in A Song of Ice and Fire is a double-edged sword. It takes as much as it gives. In Daenerys' later chapters in the first book, she saves an elderly woman from Khal Drogo's men amidst a raid on a town. They spit at the woman and call her a Maegi or a witch, yet Daenerys protects her. When Khal Drogo is wounded during the fighting, Dany begs the woman, Mirri Maz Duur, to help heal him. She reluctantly tries, but Drogo's wound festers and becomes badly infected. The Khal eventually falls from his horse unconscious and dying. In the Dothraki culture, any man that can't mount his horse is no man at all. Uneasy murmurs were spreading that Drogo was soon to be dead from infection. Dany begged Mirri once more to do what she must to save Drogo and heal him properly. Mirri said she could, but it would come at a cost. Blood magic, a life for a life. They brought in Drogo's horse and sacrificed it to some dark god. Mirri asks Dany to leave while she performs a dance with spirits to try save Drogo. All the while, the Dothraki rage that a dark Maegi is allowed to perform her evil rituals on their Khal. In the heat of the chaos, Dany, heavily pregnant at this point, passes out. When she finally awakens, much has changed. The Dothraki have mostly abandoned her. She is informed that Drogo is alive, but, well, he is in a vegetative state, and she is no longer pregnant. A life for a life. I won't get too much further into the finer details of Dany's story. I'll leave that for you to experience yourself. I'll just add that the first book ends on one of Daenerys' POV chapters. Enraged and guilt-ridden that she was sold a false dream by Mirri, she ties the witch to a funeral pyre along with her petrified dragon eggs and sets them all alight, watching the fire rise higher and higher. Dany felt a desire to feel the flames for herself. She walked into the fire and burned along with Mirri, along with Drogo, and along with her eggs. When the flames simmered into cold ash, Dany was found amongst the embers, her hair charred off, yet still alive, and not alone. The last Targaryen rose from the ashes with 3 young dragons alongside her. The dragons were back, and the magic along with them. When the fire dies, Ser Jorah finds Daenerys, naked but alive and unburnt except for her hair, nursing 2 baby dragons with the 3rd draped across her shoulders. The dragons matched the colours of their eggs, cream and gold, green and bronze, and black and scarlet. Ser Jorah drops to his knees wordlessly. He is followed by Jogo, Aggo, and Rakharo, who declare her blood of their blood, and then her handmaidens and the rest of the Dothraki do the same. Daenerys knows that they are now hers as they never were Drogo's. Daenerys rises, and for the first time in hundreds of years, the night comes alive with the music of dragons. A Song of Ice and Fire is one of the deepest and richest fictional worlds out there. Not just novels, fiction in general. There is a reason that devoted fanbase all across the world have waited patiently, ever so patiently, for the next installment of the series to be released. I don't know how to describe it other than to say the series is addicting in its approach to storytelling. The way the characters develop lends itself to the world and by extension how the story itself unfolds, all the while keeping this tantalizing air of mystery and intrigue around every story thread and throwaway line. There are videos on YouTube about just theories on the series that are longer than some film franchises. That has been Martin's approach from the beginning. He is a self-described gardener-writer. He plants seeds early in his stories in the hopes that they will bloom into massive plot points much later on. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, but either way, it has always led to countless theories and endless debates amongst the fanbase. The fact the fanbase is still seemingly as passionate as ever despite being starved of new content is a testament to the quality of the work we have received from Martin thus far. Yet, that same gap has been a sticking point for a lot of people not wanting to get into the books. The point being, why would I start a series that won't have an ending? Well, I understand the point and where it comes from. It has been 13 years since the last installment was released. People have lived their whole lives in the time between these book releases. They've graduated school, gotten new jobs, left home, came home, bought homes, gotten married, started families, etc, etc. All in the time it has taken a man to write a book, and yet it still isn't finished, nor showing any signs of being released anytime soon. That would be bad enough if it was the climax of the series and the final book, but it isn't. It's the penultimate book. Once Winds of Winter is released, then the cycle starts again as Martin tries to finish the series with A Dream of Spring. I don't want to get morbid, but George R.R. Martin is 75 years old at the time of recording this. It is a very real possibility that we won't get an ending to A Song of Ice and Fire, at least not his ending. Yet this whole discussion raises another question entirely. Does not having an ending ruin a story? This isn't for me to decide. I can only tell you my thoughts and feelings, and that being no, it doesn't ruin a story. I can concede that the lack of closure an ending brings can leave some feeling unfulfilled or empty, but I just don't believe that it hurts the body of work that is already done. Are the 5 novels we've already read lessened in quality by not having the capstone on the end of the series? I don't think so. If I was a fresh reader and I knew that the series didn't have an official ending and yet read through it anyway, I'd still be happy in my choice and content with my decision to read through this world filled with such depth of character and storytelling. Would I be sad once I reached the unfinished ending? Yes, of course. But that sadness is just a testament to the enjoyment you had reading along the way. I love these books, and I will always love these books, and should the day come or not that we can read a brand new installment, I firmly believe that you should still give the series a chance, because there's every chance you will get lost in it just like the rest of us. So, that is the video, ladies and gentlemen. I know this is a step away from the usual content that we put out here at Vintage Point, but I'm hoping it is received well enough. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and stay safe, folks.